The Galactic Concordance had three absolute rules aboard their diplomatic vessels: no weapons in the negotiation chambers, no unsanctioned AI in the navigation systems, and absolutely no one was to approach the Velkari delegation's young. Mara had broken the third rule without even knowing it existed. She'd been assigned to the Horizon's Promise as a cultural liaison, one of the few humans deemed expendable enough to send into the void, where species with actual claws, venom, and natural armor conducted their business. Humanity was still the new kid in galactic politics, barely a century into their membership, and their role mostly consisted of smiling, nodding, and trying not to accidentally insult someone who could bite through titanium. The Velkari were apex predators from a death world that made Earth look like a petting zoo. 8 feet tall, covered in obsidian scales, with rows of crystalline teeth and eyes that could track movement in 17 different spectrums. They'd evolved hunting megafauna that could shatter mountains. Their diplomats wore ceremonial armor even in peace talks, not out of aggression, but because removing it was considered obscene. And their cubs, well, no one had seen their cubs, not in 300 years of Concordance membership. Until tonight, Mara had been walking the observation deck, unable to sleep despite the ship's carefully calibrated circadian lighting. Earth was 6 months behind her, and the ache of home sat heavy in her chest. She'd found herself humming an old lullaby her grandmother used to sing, something about stars and sailors and finding your way home. That's when she heard it. A soft, chittering sound, like glass wind chimes in a breeze. She turned and froze. 2 Velkari cubs sat in the shadow of a support beam, no larger than house cats, their scales still translucent enough to show the bioluminescent organs beneath. They shouldn't have been there. The Velkari delegation quarters were 15 decks away, behind guards, behind doors that required genetic authentication, behind protocols that had been written in the blood of species who'd learned the hard way that you didn't threaten a predator's young. The cubs stared at her with eyes too large for their heads, pupils dilating and contracting as they analyzed her in spectrums she couldn't imagine. Mara's training screamed at her to back away slowly, to alert security, to do anything except what she did next. She sat down. "Hey there," she whispered, keeping her voice soft, letting the melody of her earlier humming color her words. "You two are pretty far from home, aren't you?" The smaller cub, Mara would later learn his name was Nilo, tilted his head. His scales rippled with colors she had no names for, patterns that might have been curiosity or might have been the prelude to an attack. This close? She could see the tiny serrations on his claws, each one sharp enough to fillet her without effort. He took a step forward. Every instinct told Mara to run. Humans weren't persistence hunters anymore. They'd traded their stamina for starships, their endurance for diplomacy. But somewhere deep in her DNA, she remembered what it meant to sit still while something dangerous decided whether you were friend or food. She kept humming. Nilo took another step. Then another. His sibling, larger, more cautious, hung back, but watched with those unblinking, multi-spectrum eyes. Nilo reached her, and Mara forced herself not to flinch as he pressed a small, scaled snout against her hand. His body vibrated with that glass chime sound, louder now, and Mara realized with a start that he was purring. "Okay," she breathed. "Okay. We're friends now, I guess." Nilo climbed into her lap with the awkward determination of all young creatures who haven't quite figured out their limbs. He was heavier than he looked, dense with muscle and armored hide, but he curled against her stomach with surprising gentleness. His sibling, emboldened, crept closer and settled against Mara's side. And then they did something that would later make xenobiologists question everything they thought they knew about Velkari psychology. They pressed their heads against her chest, directly over her heart. The cub's purring synchronized with her heartbeat, lub-dub, chime ring, lub-dub, chime ring, and within moments, they were asleep. Mara sat perfectly still, afraid to breathe too deeply, afraid to shatter whatever impossible trust had just been placed in her. She could feel their small bodies relaxing, their razor claws retracting, their armored scales softening into something almost vulnerable. She had no idea how long she sat there. Long enough for her legs to go numb, long enough for the ship's night cycle to deepen, long enough for her humming to fade into silence, replaced by the steady rhythm of her heart and the glass chime purring of two apex predator cubs who'd decided she was safe. That's how the Velkari matriarch found them. Mara looked up to find 8 feet of obsidian death standing over her, every scale rigid with what could only be alarm. Behind the matriarch, a dozen guards had weapons drawn, not pointed at Mara, but ready, their bodies coiled with lethal potential. Mara started, but the matriarch raised one clawed hand. The guards lowered their weapons. The matriarch knelt, moving with a grace that belied her size, and studied Mara with eyes that could see everything from ultraviolet to infrared. She looked at the sleeping cubs, at Mara's protective posture, at the way Nilo's small body rose and fell with Mara's breathing. "They heard your heartbeat," the matriarch said, her voice like stones grinding together, each word carefully shaped in galactic common. "Young Velkari, seek the sound of life, of safety. On our world, they sleep against the great beasts we bond with. Creatures with hearts that thunder." She paused, and something that might have been wonder crossed her reptilian features. "Your heart sounds like home to them." Mara felt tears prick her eyes. "You did what no guardian could do," the matriarch interrupted. "You sat still. You trusted them. You sang to them." She reached out slowly and touched Mara's shoulder with the back of her claws, a gesture of respect among Velkari. "You gave them peace." Nilo stirred, making a sleepy chirping sound, and burrowed deeper against Mara's chest. The matriarch's expression softened in a way Mara wouldn't have thought possible. "Humans," the matriarch said quietly, "are very strange creatures. Weak, soft, no armor, no venom, no weapons grown from your bodies." She looked at Mara with something like respect. "But you have hearts that sound like thunder, and sometimes that is enough." When the cubs finally woke and were gently retrieved by their guards, Nilo looked back at Mara and trilled a sound of recognition, of trust, of something the translators couldn't quite capture. The matriarch told Mara that the Velkari word for it meant heartmate, and in the morning, when the diplomatic negotiations resumed, the Velkari delegation signed every treaty the humans proposed. No one dared ask why,